Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for today's workshop, Mental Health for Researchers. We're just waiting a couple of seconds to allow everyone to join us from the waiting room. We have quite a large number of registered participants. And of course, today is a very important topic. And we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. Now, once again, thank you so much. A warm welcome to everyone. And you're joining us for today's session of the European Research and Innovation Days in ASEAN 2021. My name is Susanne Ranzovasu, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Dr. Jenny Elmacco, and both of us are the regional representatives or coordinators of the EURAXESS worldwide project in Southeast Asia. EURAXESS is a European Commission funded initiative, and our task in a nutshell is to keep you, the research community in Southeast Asia, informed about the opportunities to work with European collaborators, to develop your research career in Europe maybe, and also to be updated on what's happening in Europe in terms of science, research and innovation. Our EU R&I Days, in short, is an annual event. This is the 6th year in a row that we're hosting this really important platform. This year, our topic has been climate change, global health, and science diplomacy. And we're just in the middle of our career development segment. We have 7 workshops for young researchers to help you further develop your research career and to allow you to engage with international collaborators. And as I said, we are talking today about the super important issue of mental health. This has, of course, always been an issue. I'm sure you're all familiar with the pressures of having to publish and having to fulfill your KPI, but you also have, personal commitments and you're all feeling a bit stressed. But of course, the pandemic, I guess, has put this very much so in the spotlight. So we're very excited to have an expert speaker share his advice with us today. And to introduce him, I'll hand over to my colleague, Jenny. Jenny, please.
Thank you very much, Susanna. So I'm Dr. Jen Elmacco, the other half of EuRAXESS ASEAN. Welcome to everybody. I can just see here, Susanna, that we have people from all over, even beyond ASEAN. So we have Lavinia from Malaysia, we have Mortala from Nigeria, Chung Bui Min from Vietnam, Hagar from Tunisia, Mathurus from Bangkok, Zubia from Pakistan, Faimi from Indonesia, and so many more. Thank you so much for joining us. I would read all of your names, but then that would be an hour. But thank you for joining us. We have a very important topic to discuss today. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you somebody who I already know and who I admire. We've met years ago when he was still the chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. Right now, our trainer works in the Learning and Skills Analytics Lab of the Leibniz Information Centre for Science and Technology in Hannover. And that is in Germany, as you know. And he is the Grand Manager of the COST Action CA19117 on researcher mental health. He's a member of the Governing Board of EuroScience and was, as I said, chair of the MSCA from March 2016 to February 2018. In these roles, he has engaged with early career researchers, like most of you joining us, on topics ranging from researcher career development, innovation, research funding, science communication, science policy, research integrity, responsible research and innovation, and many more. So you can see that our trainer can really talk about a lot of things, a lot of expertise that are helpful to us researchers. But interestingly, he is an engineer. He is a trained engineer. He studied mechanical engineering in Ireland and moved to Germany in some years ago to take up a position with Hewlett-Packard. So he has jumped from research, academe to industry. He received his PhD for work in, okay, let me get this right, electrokinetically driven fluid flow from the ETH Zurich in 2004 and subsequently carried out a postdoc in colloid and interface science at the University of Geneva. So mobility-wise, he's also the perfect person to ask. He was a Marie Curie Fellow, like myself, and Junior Research Group Leader at the Institute of Bioprocessing and Analytical Measurement Techniques in Heilbad-Heiligenstadt in Germany, where his research interests focused on measurement techniques for droplet-based microfluidics. So thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours, Dr. Brian Cahill.
Thanks very, very much for the very nice introduction, Jenny. I will start my presentation right now. I'll just share my screen. And I would like to thank all of you who are attending in such great numbers. It's great to have an audience like this today. And I will talk about our project, the Researcher Mental Health Observatory, and kind of how to ensure mental health and well-being for researchers. Firstly, I won't talk very much about myself at this stage because I was introduced by Jenny. I think this is just a map of where I moved to within Europe, from Ireland to Germany to Switzerland, back to Germany again, and to UK and back to Germany. So I won't talk so much about that. This talk is within the framework of the REMO COST Action. And a COST Action is a big international networking project within Europe mainly, but also we can include members from outside of Europe as well who are willing to join working groups. We cannot fund travel expenses, but many of our activities are online. So I will give our website at the end of the project. We have 33 countries involved at the moment, and we will most probably add Sweden and Finland very soon. And also CERN has joined as an international organization. And there are countries from most from the EU member states, but also from outside the EU, like Iceland or Norway or Switzerland or Ukraine or Turkey, so that or Israel. So that we have very, very many countries involved, and it's a very, very productive network. We have many universities involved, of course, because it's to some extent a research project, but we also have very many researcher organizations involved and other kind of NGOs and charities and think tanks. So the Marie Curie Alumni Association, the Max Planck PhDNet, EuroDoc, which is the association of PhD candidates within Europe and other junior researchers, Vitae, which is an organization in the UK that provides information to researchers and to people who support the development of researcher careers. So and of course, EuRAXESS. We have very many EuRAXESS national coordinators involved in our network, and very often from Eastern Europe. That our project is mainly about community involvement. It's kind of to gather evidence, to do research, to joint research, to talk about what we're doing and about the situation, to deliver training and education, and then to match people from within our network to each other so that they can do more research. So it's a 4 years long project, and throughout this time that we will do a lot of discussion and talking and putting on meetings, but hopefully we will also do a lot of research work and get a lot done. We have 3 working groups. The first is focused on the systemic level, so affecting policy within Europe, to connect researchers with civil organizations and policymakers, and to focus on systemic issues within the research environment, and to encourage system level actors to take action and to explore what they can do to improve mental health among researchers. The next level is the institutional level. So how we can work with institutions to assess best practices and to spread best practices within the network, and to share institutional experiences, for example, on setting up mentoring programs. And at the third level, we will kind of work on at the local level, so the community level or the individual levels, how we can promote researcher well-being on a practical level. What sort of training works well, what researchers can do themselves, how we can set up peer-to-peer mentoring support, online networks, counseling. So basically the practitioner level. That my involvement in this topic started when I was chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. In that role, that you come into contact with a lot of researchers and you become acquainted with problems that maybe I didn't have myself. But I think problems that researchers have with supervision very often, with disagreements with their institution, and sometimes you can see that there's a kind of a deeper problem, which is the kind of distrust very often of the researcher for their institution, which isn't always justified. And so I think that we had to find a way to take action. And the first way that we could take action was to raise awareness that there was a problem. So at the Marie Curie Alumni Association annual conference in 2018 in Leuven in Belgium, that we made researcher mental health a major topic of the plenary sessions. And following on from that we launched we submitted a proposal for a session at the EuroScience Open Forum, which is a big conference in Europe every 2 years. And we published an article about it. We held a session, and leading on from the session, that 2 of our speakers were interviewed, one by Science and the other by Nature, so that we could see that this was the first step of what we were doing was to raise awareness. So following on from that we reached out to other organizations that were working on the same topic at the same time, for example, the Max Planck PhDNet, but also Eurodoc, and many of the Vitae and many of the other organizations that later formed part of our project. And at that time, this was the summer of 2018, there was a big article about the Max Planck Society in Science about one researcher who was accused of bullying. And this was something that the institutions, particularly within Germany, looked at this, and they don't want to be featured in such articles. And a lot of the institutions started taking action. But this was something that the Max Planck PhDNet had been working on for quite some time, had gathered evidence, and within a week of this story breaking, that they had published a position paper on power abuse and conflict resolution. So suggesting, not complaining directly about the bullying and kind of power abuse for supervisors, but suggesting ways to solve the problem in constructive ways. What evidence is there for increased levels of mental health problems among researchers? There has been quite a lot of work done in the last 5 years. One of our network members, Katja Levesque, is professor at the University of Ghent in Flanders. That's the Dutch-speaking area in Belgium. And she did a survey about work organization and mental health problems in PhD students. And this got a lot of attention in 2017 and was one of the first papers that really got such attention. It really blew up on social media, and kind of Katja is not on social media herself, but this was something that a lot of people really paid a lot of attention to. So if you look at this is a comparison between PhD students and a comparative educated group, that you felt under constant strain, 40% of PhD students in comparison with 27% of the other group. And across all of the 12 categories, the PhD students scored significantly higher, and often much higher. For example, lost confidence in self, 24% in comparison with 8% of the comparison group. So this is something where we can see that a significant minority of PhD students ticked boxes across all 12, over 10% ticked for all 12 of these issues that they could experience. That's at the same time that Susan Guthrie, she works for RAND Europe, that's a think tank, it's a policy organization assessed mental health in the research environment through a literature survey, and not just on PhD students, but all higher education staff. And that higher education staff report worse well-being than those in other types of employment, which was shown in the survey before, but that many university staff find their jobs stressful compared to high-risk groups such as healthcare workers. And kind of we can see, I mean, that most people would expect healthcare workers to have higher stress than university staff. That PhD students have specific challenges, that high level of work demands and work-life conflict, low job control, poor support, not always, but sometimes from supervisors, exclusion from decision-making. And academics are hiding their mental health issues from their colleagues and from their superiors. And the job insecurity is an issue, gender is an issue, that with women being more poorly represented within the research environment, particularly at higher levels. And spending more time on research is associated with reduced stress. So I think this is one of the things that we see very, very often, is that that researchers really love their work. And even if it causes them stress, that they kind of remain curious for their own research interests. That poor well-being can impact the productivity of researchers. That worrying about being productive can make you less productive. And it also impacts on the job satisfaction, or the impact of stress on job satisfaction is unclear. So and evidence on effectiveness on mental health interventions is limited. So this is a huge focus of our project, is to study which mental health interventions are effective. So to do research and to find ways to intervene better. The Max Planck PhDNet has run very, very many surveys over the last years. I think this is just a slide from their survey from 2019, and I will bring attention to the 3 columns on the end, and it shows that the first year PhD candidates kind of demonstrate higher well-being than the 3rd year, so that we can see that the stress and anxiety rises during the PhD, and this what we can also see is that the German PhD candidates, which are a little bit less than half of the PhD candidates in the survey, have higher well-being than the EU citizens, and that the citizens from outside the EU have the least, have the most problems. So what we would like to do is to suggest problems for addressing the problem, because this is the focus of our project. So one of our project participants, Inge van der Weijden, she is from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. She wrote a report about the mental well-being of Leiden University PhD candidates and made concrete recommendations to appoint independent psychologists, to establish a supervision team for international PhD candidates. I think that the model of PhD supervision has changed a lot within the last 10 years, that more often we see that we have a distributed model of PhD supervision, where a PhD candidate may have one main supervisor, but has a number of other mentors or supervisors within the school, or if it's an interdisciplinary project from a different discipline, who advise them and are part of their PhD committee. And this kind of reduces power imbalance and makes it easier for the PhD candidate to access different research ideas if they're having a problem. That career coaching for both non-academic and academic careers, and including the development of transferable skills, are quite important, because most PhD students will make career outside of academia, and that it is very important that their work during PhD contributes to the career development afterwards. That supervisors should receive training, both new and experienced supervisors, particularly new supervisors. and that mental health problems should be a part of this training, and cross-cultural communication, that PhD candidates should have transparent requirements for graduation, that independent PhD mentoring groups are important, and that the well-being of PhD candidates should be monitored. And another, as in the last slide, that interventions should be evaluated so that we have an evidence-based approach for what actually works to improve the situation. Within the Marie Curie Alumni Association, that we set up a mentoring initiative for early career researchers called Referent. This is one way that early career researchers can help each other. So what issues do PhD candidates have? Firstly, that we have uncertain career prospects, that kind of many early career researchers focus very, very strongly on their research and their curiosity for their research topic, and kind of are very highly engaged in this, that they may work in the lab or the library or the archive, wherever they're working, and focus very strongly and work very hard, but think very little about what they will do afterwards. And to make career, that is very, very important to think from the very beginning, how do I see my career developing? And not knowing how it will develop is okay, but that means that you should look to talk with other people to see what careers other people have pursued and to try to learn what you might like to do. And this graph shows, is from about 2012, 2013. It's from the Royal Society Report, The Scientific Century, Securing Our Future Prosperity. And it shows that very, very few of the people who start PhD will become professor. Some more will become permanent research staff, or both within universities or in non-university research in industry or government. And many more will pursue alternative careers, so careers outside science. So I think it's very, I mean, and outside science might mean that you're a product manager in industry, which is kind of marketing or sales for industry, but that there are many careers that will lead on from doing PhD outside of science, and that you should provide yourself with the skills to do so as early as possible. One of the main problems is conflict with supervisors. I mean, supervisors, I think the relationship with the supervisor is in some ways is very, very close, because very often they're the person who hires you, pays your wages, provides research support, evaluates your thesis, and it's a very, very close relationship, and it's a dependent relationship for the PhD candidate or the early career researcher. And very often the supervisor doesn't have power. Maybe your contract runs out and they would like to extend, but they may not have the funding available to do so. So I think very often this is a relationship where there is expectations on both sides, and that very clearly that these results show that if dissatisfaction with the supervisor kind of results in higher stress, anxiety, and depression for the PhD candidates. But if we look on the right-hand side, we can see that how satisfied are you with your PhD supervision in general? It's about 25% of the candidates are dissatisfied. So it's a minority, but a significant minority are dissatisfied with their supervisor. Another form of how PhD candidates or early career researchers, even senior researchers, can suffer from stress and depression is through imposter syndrome. This is a form of self-criticism or perfectionism, which even people who on all kind of neutral from a neutral objective perspective, that they have a very successful career can feel that they are not successful, or that they were lucky, or that they don't deserve their own success. And this is a form of self-criticism, and maybe this drives people to overachieve, but it can also kind of lead to mental health problems. And this is something that you should kind of celebrate your success and recognize it and build on it, and not to aim for perfection all at once, but to aim for continual progress step by step, because research is not a sprint, it's very often a marathon. So I think that you have to take it slowly and continually, and to build day by day, and not to expect results to happen very, very quickly. And that within our research environment, that there is a very high pressure to publish as quickly as possible, as much as possible. And for early career researchers, the expectation to publish in top journals very quickly can lead to significant stress and anxiety, because this is that you may be starting in a particular research field and have quite a lot to learn, and particularly within the first year, that you will learn a huge amount, and that within to work with your supervisor and with your colleagues to find results that can be published is possible, but often the impact of research that is performed by early career researchers is not really clear until years afterwards. And this is the top journals often select publications based on criteria that are not just how good is this research, it's how much impact do they think this research will have, how many times do they think it will be cited within the next 2 years. And sometimes these criteria are not based on how good the research is, it's based on who are you. And often more well-known people will be cited more often because people know them. And if you're kind of starting off, even that it may take a number of years before people realize that this was good research, with the quantity of research that is out there. That work-life balance is very, very often a problem in research, because people are so motivated to do work and that they take on much too much work. And so that if we are kind of overwhelmed by work, that can lead to anxiety, depression, burnout, and a lack of work-life balance, and in the end, low productivity. That the Max Planck PhDNet also collected data on working hours and related this to depression. And on the left, it's working hours, where we can see at least up until 61 to 65 working hours per week, we see kind of increased depression among researchers. And after that, it seems to drop a little bit, but maybe this is to do with lower numbers of people working more than 65 hours a week. And this is also reproduced for people who regularly work on weekends. So another question is kind of work-family conflict, because for researchers with responsibility for children, they may have been very productive up until the time that, through overworking, up until the time that they have children. And this is, and that once they have children, that they have to reduce their work hours. And this is equally so for men and women, but it can be that it tends to be that women carry more responsibility for children. And this is a question I know myself. I've had children, and I can definitely say that I work a lot less than I used to before, and that this is something that that research environment should support kind of the development of the careers of people who have responsibility and who work their 40 hours a week or whatever. But if the research world requires you to work 60 hours a week, this is quite difficult. it impacts directly on equality. That many researchers feel isolated, often just by focusing very much on their research topic, that they may struggle to discuss their day-to-day research, their problems, their struggles with their colleagues, and particularly with their friends and family, and they may feel that nobody understands their problems. And sometimes that there is excessive competition with colleagues. This is not always the case, but I think that the work environment that you're working in, that some labs definitely have better atmospheres than other labs. Many of us have been internationally mobile or have moved country, and that this brings a certain potential to be isolated, particularly if you're kind of newly internationally mobile. That definitely you can reach out to people from your own country, to other people from the local country, and also many researchers from other countries that you can make a connection to. That overworking can lead us to neglect social support networks and not to contact people or to make kind of appointments to meet up or to go out. COVID over the last while has led to increased isolation, and this has been shown by research, both within research networks, but also kind of for other people. That for international researchers there can be issues. That international mobility can be hugely rewarding experience, both personally and for your career. But we can experience a culture shock when we move to a different country, a different academic system, with different research practices. We may have problems with language in the new country. We may experience homesickness. That we may not have support networks in the country that we live in, particularly if we have health problems or similar when we're in a new country. And particularly the support for the career development of international researchers can be different than for local researchers. And particularly if you want to make career in a country that's different to the one that you live in, that maybe the career support that you receive needs to be that you need to also take advice from people from your home country or to the industry or academic system that you would like to move into. For example, if in your country you need to show lecturing experience to gain a position, but in the country that you live in, you cannot acquire lecturing experience, this may put you at a disadvantage if you return home. A big issue for international researchers is resident and visa problems, because most often these arise when you get to the end of your research stay, which may be the time when you need to defend your thesis. And if there is any delay in defending your thesis and this runs into a problem with residence, this can be quite distressing for a researcher. And I mean, I've experienced this not personally, but I've seen this problem that the kind of international kind of office of the town hall can be difficult to deal with, and they have their kind of legal rules. And if your contract runs out, that it can be very convenient if your institution finds a way to extend your contract. Financial problems, I included this graph for the comparison between postdoc, academic and industry salaries. This is from the US, which is different than many other countries. But I think often choosing to work in research, particularly a PhD or postdoc level, means that your annual salary may be a little lower than it otherwise would be. So PhD and postdoc positions are sometimes well paid, not always. I know from within Germany that there are a very, very wide range of salary payments to PhD students, sometimes purely depending on the discipline. So if you're an engineer, maybe you get paid more than if you're in life sciences or social science or humanities. That many universities are based in attractive but very expensive cities for accommodation, childcare, health insurance, travel, and so. But particularly travel is an expense that will be higher for international researchers because they may have to travel home and to save up to do so. And some international researchers send remittances to their family in their home countries. And this is something that I don't think research institutions within Europe understand, that this is the case. And I think this is something that particularly if you finish your PhD, I have had international researchers come to me, they say, I would like to make career in academia, but I have financial responsibilities beyond myself, and I will choose to work in industry just because of the family situation. So how to fight mental health issues at the level of your own self as an early career researcher, you should look after your own health and well-being as much as possible. You should try to sleep well. You should prioritize your social life, sport, hobbies, and talk to friends, colleagues, and family. And if you have a problem with your mental health, seek professional help. That there may be a counseling service within your university, that your health insurer may pay for professional help, and that you should try to look after your well-being at yourself. That you should decrease career stress by thinking about your life after PhD as early as possible within the PhD. This is not something that you need to think about just in the last 3 months of your between submitting your thesis and defending your thesis. You should think about it much earlier. You should, if you go to conferences, you should speak to the exhibitors. Maybe even if they're from industry, maybe they can give you advice about making career in industry. That you should take part in training courses and join extracurricular groups. That if you like singing, join a choir. If you like playing football, find a team, not necessarily from within the university, also from outside. If you're an international researcher, I know from Germany that at least Indonesian students tend to have a lot of clubs within the universities, and most big German universities. So I think that if you can find a community to be part of, this really helps. And you should work on yourself, on your own qualifications, on your own skills. You should be clear about your research priorities. To finish PhD, you don't necessarily need to win the Nobel Prize. It would be nice, and it would be nice to publish in Nature or Science, but this is not that ought to. Sometimes enough is enough, and that you should concentrate on finishing your PhD first. You should work on your communication skills, on your project and time management, and set up routines for your workday, for your meetings, and include your private life. You should build networks within your departments, but also internationally and within your discipline, and also to industry if that's relevant to you. You should seek a mentor or mentors and keep in touch with people and build networks. And it's okay to say no. If something is too much, you can say so. You can discuss kind of the expectations about your research and about what you need to achieve. You should negotiate with your supervisor, because negotiation is a skill that you will need no matter what you do in life. And kind of this is something that it may not be easy, and sometimes you won't win, but I think sometimes you should discuss. One of the programs that's available is EuRAXESS mentoring program on shaping the future of a researcher coming to Europe. This is run by EuRAXESS Bulgaria. I'm involved as a mentor, but I can recommend this to anybody who is interested in reaching out to somebody who can discuss what the research system in Europe is like, or to give you some advice, or to listen to your questions. And kind of how can we fight mental health issues on a macro level, on the policy level? We can gather evidence, we can assess kind of research practices and interventions in favor of mental health. We can raise awareness among stakeholders within the research environment and develop proactive policies for improving mental health. We can push for support for early career researchers and push for more positions for PhD counselors within institutions, and push for funding for mental health research and for more sustainable research careers. That we have written a Researcher Mental Health and Wellbeing Manifesto, and this is available on Zenodo. It's published openly, and this you can scan the code, or you can go to the link, or you can put Researcher Mental Health Manifesto into Google. I'm sure it will come up. You can join the network. That at the moment we are reorganizing our working groups, and we will put out a call very soon about how you can apply through the COST website. But we're also, we have presence on many social media, and also on kind of ResearchGate, Zenodo, Zotero. We have a literature library, and on YouTube we have very many videos. That our next webinar is next week, and we will talk about an Erasmus project, Universe, and that's about creating a better research environment through science communication, through open science, and through, we will also talk to counsellors from Trinity College in Dublin. So I would thank you for listening, and now I really look forward to to your questions and to a short discussion. So maybe I can hand over to Jenny, and we can.
Yes, thank you so much for that. A lot of takeaways from that. I also bring back in Susan. She has been sending me messages as well, that we have really good questions on the chat. So Susan, would you like to moderate those questions that you found that we should answer first?
Yes, exactly. Thanks so much, Brian. So of course, this is an issue that resonates extremely well, or well is probably not a good word, but it resonates with the audience. There are quite a few questions, so I'm not sure whether you're an expert on all of them, but perhaps you could also direct people to other sources where they can find some support. Now, our first question comes from Inzaman Ahmad, who is referring to a problem that I'm sure lots of people are faced with. So he gets a lot of rejections from reviewers for his papers. Now, do you have any suggestions how to deal with that kind of stress?
I think this is somehow part of our research world, that reviewers. That I have seen kind of reviewers who have asked for corrections that aren't serious, and that are kind of, I've seen papers that have had text rejections from one journal to be accepted by the next journal within 2 weeks. So this means, I think I can't speak about the particular research, but I think some journals that they reject papers based on their perceived impact of the paper. So that, and this has something to do with research, but it also has to do with how well known the particular researcher is. And it can be very difficult for a researcher to break into publishing in top level journals. So I think that my recommendation is to publish your work. I think that sometimes it's more important to publish the work than to make it available to the research community and beyond. And that if one journal doesn't publish, if it's based on quality, that is one question, or whether the paper is correct. But if the paper is fully correct and has important conclusions, that you should try to find a kind of a community that is interested in that work. And it may be that this journal is not the right one. But I think this is probably a topic for a completely different kind of webinar, but I think that is a very, very big topic for research evaluation in our kind of research communities.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Brian. And maybe just to add, we had an entire webinar dedicated to this topic, how to get your research published. And we had an expert from Taylor and Francis who was advising us. Now, she has given us a lot of advice on what to make sure, what to do to make sure that the reviewers accept your manuscript. So what we're going to do, I think Jenny is going to share the link now in the chat box where you can watch the video and where you can also find the slides of this presenter. But maybe back to our topic today, Brian. Now, here's an interesting question from Arini Utami, who is thanking you, of course, for the important topic. And she is asking, in your experience, what are the steps and some strategies to start mental health awareness in the workplace, where mental health issues are still seen as taboo, including, for example, that mental health is not covered by insurance? So that, I think, is still the case in many ASEAN workplaces. What's your advice, Brian?
I think this is definitely an important question, because there is a very, very high stigma attached to mental health. And I know from the Ireland that I grew up in the 1980s, there was a high stigma attached to mental health, and that has changed. So I think it's something for what we did is we published articles, we ran meetings, we spoke out, and sometimes it's important to find a community that supports you, and it's not just that you're one person on your own. And I think this is a lot of what we're doing within the project, is to make a community that will support people to speak out. I know that within Asia, there's a project by Cactus on research on mental health globally, but they're based in India, and they are raising this topic. So I think it's very, very important to build alliances to other people who are working on the same topics, and speaking out, and to work together to find ways to raise awareness.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's some very good and solid advice. There's more questions here. Some of them are very specific, but maybe this is a question maybe that you can draw from your own experience as a researcher. This is about perfectionism. Do you have any advice for researchers that are always striving to be perfect? But maybe this is a question from Bitch New Lu, but I'm combining this with a question from an anonymous researcher who is talking about the issue of competition amongst colleagues, which causes stress as well. What is your advice, how to manage this, the perfectionism, and also always competing with the researchers around you?
I think these are kind of very important comments, because it's not always kind of a big policy issue. I think sometimes in our kind of own environments and our own behavior, I will start with perfectionism, that very often a deadline is very important for researchers, and sometimes this is set externally or set yourself, but not meeting deadlines can be stressful. But I personally feel that kind of perfectionism holds many people back in research who are very highly talented, because they feel, I think, linked to the first question, that if they submit, that there will be this question or that question. And sometimes you only know what the question will be until you submit, and you deal with the questions that come from reviewers. And sometimes the question from reviewers can make your work better in ways that you never expected. that even if they are difficult, sometimes the most difficult questions can be the most stimulating questions personally. So I think if you have a positive attitude, but to be perfection is to keep on making small progress every day, and to recognize your progress and to build on it. And I think that over time that you will accumulate enough progress to do excellent research. So this is a difficult question, but you shouldn't let perfectionism hold you back. And the second part was about competition.
Yeah.
This is I definitely think that often the competition within research groups or even institutions is very, very destructive, and that working together is more and collaboration is a better way to work. And often you may be the first author paper on a paper, but I think particularly within disciplines like life sciences, teamwork is so prevalent that it is important that we kind of try to create environments within our teams that are collaborative and productive, and that if you see one of your colleagues who has a problem, try to help them out, try to involve them in, ask them to go to lunch, or that we should reach out to our colleagues and try to support them.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yes, I agree. I think a lot of it also comes from how you yourself are approaching working with your colleagues. So a lot, I think all of us, I think, also have to in a way lead by example, which is not always easy. There's a question here from someone, Elvira Resch. She's asking whether there are any specific programs at universities or research centers for PhDs that address the topics that you mentioned. Maybe, Brian, you could mention again the mentoring program that the EURAXESS project has just initiated.
I will put the link for the EuRAXESS program. I think this is something that I'm not sure if I understand the question fully, because there are people who work on kind of research on higher education, and some of them are involved within our network. But there are also we also have many people from within institutions who are active in providing training or working counseling services, or work who have set up mentoring programs, whether that's within the Marie Curie Alumni Association or EuRAXESS, but also people from within institutions. So I think this is something that we are very interested in finding the people who are doing something productive and active, and finding out how we can transfer knowledge from their experience to other institutions.
Thank you, Brian. I'm just looking myself here. I'm going to drop in a second the EuRAXESS mentoring program so that we can together have a look at it. But I'd like to maybe make it a little bit interactive. So if you all want to write your comments in the chat box, we have a question here. The question is from Umesh Netia, who's asking. Sorry, this is a different question. Umesh, will come to your question in a second. This is from Tanu Nguyen, who is wondering whether there is any advice from Brian, but also from us as a group here. Do you have any suggestion how to cope with stress that is caused by having multiple tasks to perform at the same time? So I think this is something that we're all dealt with. You have different tasks, they're all equally important, you're feeling overwhelmed. What is your personal suggestion? How do you cope? What is your best method to remain productive and to keep the level of mental stress down? Maybe if all of you want to type your suggestions in the chat box, and maybe Brian at the same time can give us some of his advice.
This is work organization and overload, and how we can manage our time and resources. And I think personally, you have to say no some suggestions that may be very interesting, or find somebody else who might be interested in doing it, because I think if we overload ourselves with work, this generally this can lead to burnout, and that with research, there are very often, we have very many ideas, but we have to choose the best ones and to concentrate on those and to make progress as best we can and as quickly as we can, but at least to prioritize.
Yeah, I think I can jump in as well, Susanna, because we also have our experiences with this. One thing that I can share, I had a brilliant colleague before when I was doing my my work in Germany, and he told me that when the impression, there's this wrong impression that if you work longer, that you are also effective, and this is not true. You know, there are people who work like 10 hours a day, but their output is smaller than somebody who works like 4 hours a day. So there has to be this realization in yourself when you are most effective and when you are not. And the other thing, the other part of the equation is to value rest, because rest is really optimization. You are at your best if you also have your time to rest. Because sometimes I think, and I think in ASEAN societies, that's also one of these challenges, that if you somehow say, you have this thing that, oh, I'm so busy. It's like a badge, right? Like, I'm doing so much work because I'm so busy. But if you're not handling things well because of the time, or because you are not really at your optimum, then I think that then you're not really doing the best work and doing the best thing for yourself as well. So we have to be kinder to ourselves, I think, so that we can bring out the best out of ourselves.
Absolutely, I can only second that. And what I personally do, I always, before I start my day, every day I do this, I have a list of the top 3 things that I need to complete on that day. Then I have another 3 that it would be great if I could do them, but I can also push them to the next day. And that really helps me to focus, and it helps me to not get overwhelmed. So I just always make sure that these top 3 are being ticked, so I can go to bed and sleep easy. Because I think it's absolutely right what Jenny says. You have to take care of yourself, because no one else does it. Your boss is definitely pretending to take care of yourself, and I hope they do, but you have to look after number 1. And that is, it sounds silly, and a lot of people don't want to admit it because it makes them sound selfish. But this is important. If you want to be productive, you also have to make sure that you find time just for yourself, to go for a walk, to be with your family, to have some 20 minutes of Netflix time. So that's what helps me. I mean, and I think that's what our audience also agrees with. They say you have to prioritize, and also delegation. I think that's important. If you can also just make sure that your group is sharing the workload, and it's not just you that carries the entire burden. Now, there's another question, and I think this is important. I don't want to ignore this because it keeps coming up here. 2 issues. One is xenophobia. Xenophobia appears to be something that at least some of our audience members have been faced with. So the suggestion is that this should also be part of official studies on mental health. I don't know, Brian, whether you have any particular suggestions or comments at this point?
I definitely think that xenophobia is an aspect of many countries throughout the world, and also the research world. That there are many, I think that generally we see, at least in Europe, we see a lot of international researchers at early career researcher level, but many fewer who kind of progress beyond that level. So a lot of the time it's thought that, well, that the early career researchers from kind of outside of Europe will return to their home countries afterwards and make career there. And nobody really knows what the situation is in their country. So the advice is generally quite sparse, and the expectation, and that in some ways professors tend to make a choice who they can support to make career. And that is very often somebody from the home country, so that they're living in. So I think this is definitely the case. But this is not the case in all countries. So it's quite, I think at least Europe and the world is very diverse. But I think in some countries, definitely we see kind of very low representation of foreigners at high level positions within the research world. And but this is really dependent on the supervisor, the group leader, and the research institution, because there are research institutions that integrate foreign researchers much better. I can just say that from the TIB where I now work, that a lot of the researcher positions are in information technology, and most of the researchers are not from Germany. So this is the case, but I think there are other disciplines, particularly in sociology and humanities, where there are many fewer foreign researchers in research institutions, and much of publication is done in German. So I think that it can be very, I think that the research world is very diverse, and even within the same institution, you can have different experiences. But I think definitely, I think for racism, that often I see kind of a macho element to that. I know that I come from engineering, and that definitely there is a more macho way of behaving, and that may be more open to discrimination against, or kind of, and this is very unfortunate. But it's not very widespread, but it does exist. And that it may not be overt racism. I think one of the comments was talking about it's kind of like low-level racism, which is maybe comments between colleagues when somebody else isn't there, and that, you know, and that this is, I have observed this, and this is not productive. But I've also worked in kind of research environments that have been very supportive and kind of open and actively against discrimination.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I think this is, of course, an issue that you find everywhere in the world. We had a question here by someone also who is explaining that they are currently involved in an international PhD program in Hungary. And I think they are also faced with problems that the project seems to be designed for Hungarians, but not for the international students. And I think this is very indicative of a lack of awareness. And I think you mentioned that, Brian, that a lot of problems occur because people are just not aware. What you were mentioning, that people in Europe may not be aware that international researchers have financial obligations towards their family. Even as PhD students, they're expected to contribute financially to their family at home. So it's often a lack of understanding what the other person is going through. So I think this question here comes from Zaklina Mierczyk. So this seems to me also one of these issues. Now, sorry, Brian, if you want to respond.
I think that's very often in countries where most of the activities are organized in the native language, that this excludes anybody who doesn't speak, whether it's Hungarian or German or French, and that it kind of results in a sort of exclusion from discussion of topics for international researchers. I think definitely for those of us who are in the Marie Curie Alumni Association, that definitely that association provided a way to discuss issues in English. And this is not the case. I think in some countries, I think I can say in Sweden, that a lot of the researcher organizations are completely organized in English, there's quite a lot of activity. But I think in Hungary, that we ran a meeting in Hungary, and this was in Hungarian. So, but I think this is, we chose to run the meeting in Hungarian because our action chair is Hungarian, and it wasn't to exclude international researchers. It was we thought this would be the best way to engage the community.
Thank you, Brian. So we are coming to an end of today's session, and I just briefly want to summarize. So what we've had, of course, is there is a growing awareness in the workforce in academia that mental health is important. There's, as we've heard from Brian, various studies to, first of all, get an idea of where the problems are coming from, and then develop strategies and methods and put structures in place to address those and to make it much more enjoyable and less pressure cooker environment also for researchers. Now, we've already heard from Brian, from Jenny, and also from our audience some of the strategies on how to cope with the pressures that we're faced with. I wanted to just quickly introduce you again. Brian has already mentioned it, the EURAXESS mentoring program, which we all think is a fabulous tool for researchers that are interested here. This is specifically for young researchers that are interested in going to Europe. So you'll be partnered with a mentor to take you to the different steps and prepare you also for working in a different research environment. So this is a fabulous program that we can really recommend to you if you are one of those researchers that are thinking of spending some time in Europe. I'm going to in the chat box share this link with you so you can all look at it at your own leisure. But of course, Jenny and I, we are EuRAXESS ASEAN, and we are permanently based in Southeast Asia. Jenny is currently in the Philippines. She will be moving to Vietnam whenever the pandemic comes to an end. I'm based in Singapore, and we cover really all 10 countries. So whenever you have specific questions, you can always reach out to us. And of course, what we're doing right now is to offer these workshops to you, to give you some tools that help you address some of these issues. Jenny, can I hand over to you for maybe some final words of wisdom?
Final words of wisdom. I think Brian has already said all of those, but I wanted to remind everybody that we are not done yet with the Research Career Development Series. So you have a lot to look forward to still. So tomorrow we are going to have again Dr. Sam Illingworth, who will be giving a talk on science communication. So please don't forget about that. On the 14th, we have another member of the MCAA. Brian knows him very well. Dr. Marco Masia, who will be talking about entrepreneurship for researchers and also about, bridging science and business. And also if you want to have a career in the industry, that's on the 14th of December. And then as a final one, we have science diplomacy, which is actually like a panel of very interesting people, but led by the current chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, Mustafa. So please join us for that. And also, if you are from Vietnam, Nasati and MOST have a special program for a special workshop on this, on the EU-Vietnam partnership. So please join us on the 13th of December at 1:30 Vietnam time. So in any case, please follow us on our social media accounts so you're updated. And I'd like to thank Brian for taking the time, and all of you who are staying with us for this very, very interactive session. This is the kind of session that I like, Susan. It's like having a conversation, and all of the people are really active. So thank you so much. And please give us time to respond to you guys, especially, on your certificates and also the evaluation and the presentations, please. It's just me and Dr. Susan, actually, in EuRAXESS ASEAN. So it will take us a little bit of time, but we will get back to you. Thank you so much.
Exactly, because we have to also keep an eye on our mental health. But I wanted to just really urge you something, as Jenny has just said. Don't let the conversation stop here. We very much build our activities based on your feedback. So if you tell us now, this was really interesting, we'd like to really get more advice, and this is the topic that we really want to hear from your experts on, then just send us an email at asean@euraxess.net, asean@euraxess.net, And we will put together another workshop to really address the issues that are burning on your minds. And again, also from me, thanks so much, Brian. I hope you're having fun in Hanover. Do you have snow?
Not yet. We had kind of a few kind of flakes of snow last week, but nothing serious. I think in the east and south of Germany there is snow. There was a big storm in Ireland earlier in the week, coming in off the Atlantic, but at the moment it's cold, but no snow, not yet, but maybe in the next few weeks.
See, here's my jumper, because I'm on my way to Germany. I already bought a big fat jumper. Okay.
That's good. I think you will definitely need it at this time of year.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in the next session in just a couple of days. Thanks so much and good night.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.